In a room beneath a museum in London, there are drawers that have not been opened since the day they were filled. Not because what is inside them is fragile, though most of it is broken. Not because it cannot be read, though the script is punishing, pressed into wet clay with a cut reed 5,000 years ago. The drawers stay shut because there are too many of them. Hundreds of thousands of tablets, catalogued, numbered, lit, and unread since antiquity. Then something was pointed at all of it at once. Not a scholar with a lifetime and a specialism, but a system with neither, asked one flat question. Which of these pieces belong together? What came back was not a translation. It was an inventory of how close we came to losing the first words our species ever wrote down, and how little we understood about why they were nearly lost. Everything you are about to hear rests on something you can verify tonight. The platform is public. You can open it in a browser, in your own language, and read lines of Babylonian poetry that no human eye had read in 1,000 years. You do not need to take my word for any of it. That matters, because what follows is going to sound like exaggeration, and it is not. Start with the physical scale, because the scale is the whole story. The British Museum holds hundreds of thousands of cuneiform tablets. Not hundreds, not thousands. Hundreds of thousands. A great many of them were dug out of the mounds of Iraq in the 19th century, crated, shipped, and shelved, and have not been read since the ancient world put them down. In collaboration with the British Museum and with the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, tens of thousands have now been photographed and transliterated. Tens of thousands out of hundreds of thousands. Sit with that ratio for a moment, and understand what these objects are. Cuneiform is the oldest writing system we know of. Wedge marks pressed into damp clay with a cut reed, then dried or baked hard. It was used for 3,000 years, across Sumerian and Akkadian and Babylonian and Assyrian, which is longer than the alphabet you are reading has existed. It is not a single language. It is a technology that carried many, and the signs shift value depending on which one you are in and what sits around them. A wedge cluster that means one thing in a legal contract from Ur can mean something else entirely in a hymn from Babylon 8 centuries later. It is difficult. It is not mysterious. Scholars broke cuneiform in the 1850s. We can read it. That is the part people get wrong when they imagine some sealed and undecipherable code waiting to be cracked. There is no code. There has been no code for 170 years, which makes the actual situation stranger and considerably worse, because this is the largest body of unread human writing on Earth, and it is not buried. It is not lost at sea. It is not under a jungle. It is indoors. It is numbered. It is climate controlled. It sits on metal shelves in a building with a gift shop, and you could walk past the wall it is behind on your way to look at something else. Clay does not rot. Clay does not fade the way papyrus fades or parchment crumbles. Fire, which destroys every other ancient medium, bakes clay harder and preserves it better. These tablets have already survived the burning of the cities they were written in. They survived the collapse of the empires that produced them. They survived being shipped across a continent by men who did not know what most of them said. They survived all of that intact, and then they went quiet anyway. For 150 years, the barrier was never the clay, and it was never the language. It was arithmetic. Before we go further, the people who spent their lives on this deserve to have their case put as strongly as it can be put, because it is a better case than you might expect. For a century and a half, Assyriologists worked the only way anyone could. A scholar would sit with a broken piece of clay, copy the wedge marks onto paper by hand, sign by sign, and produce a transliteration. Then he would compare it against his own notes, and against colleagues' notes, and against published copies held in other countries, hoping to recognize a phrase he had seen somewhere before. When two fragments overlapped, the join was made, and a few more lines of a dead language came back into the world. By that method, entirely by hand, scholars reconstructed roughly 2/3 of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Consider what that took. There is no complete tablet of Gilgamesh anywhere on Earth. There never was one in the modern era. What survives is many separate copies, made by many scribes across many centuries, each of which has itself shattered into pieces, most of which are missing. The poem was assembled from that. It is one of the great acts of patient scholarship in any field, and it was done by people with paper, pencils, and memory. That is the story, and it is not a foolish story. But there is a problem in it, and the problem does not shrink when you look closer. It grows. The problem is not linguistic. It is arithmetic, and it is brutal. To find out whether two fragments belong together, you have to compare them. That is the entire method. But you do not know in advance which two, so in principle, every fragment must be checked against every other fragment. And the number of possible pairings does not rise in step with the pile. It rises as the square of it. Double the fragments, and you quadruple the comparisons. 1,000 pieces gives you around 500,000 pairings. 100,000 pieces gives you 5 billion. Now weigh that against what a human being actually is. A gifted scholar, working a full career, can hold perhaps a few hundred fragments in genuine working memory. Not glanced at. Known. Recognized on sight. Well enough that a phrase on a new piece rings a bell from a drawer in another country 20 years ago, a few hundred, against a pile of hundreds of thousands. This is why generations of brilliant people produced fragments of a picture and never the picture. It was not a failure of intelligence or of effort or of will. Every one of them was working correctly. They were simply running an algorithm that scales badly against a data set that is very large, using hardware that sleeps 8 hours a night and dies after 60 years. The writing was never hard to read. The writing has been readable since the 1850s. What could not be done was to read all of it at the same time. And that, precisely that, is the thing that changed. Here is the part that surprises almost everyone who hears it, and it is worth slowing down for. The system that broke this open was not, in the main, a translator. It was not taught Babylonian in the way you might imagine, sat down with a grammar and drilled until it could render a hymn into English. That is not what happened, and if you go in expecting it, you will miss the actual achievement entirely. It was a matcher. It was built to answer one narrow, unglamorous question. Which of these broken pieces belong to the same original text? Enrique Jimenez, professor of ancient Near Eastern literatures at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, and his team began digitizing surviving cuneiform fragments in 2018. What they built is called the fragmentarium, and its purpose is to hold every transliterated fragment in one place and compare them automatically, at a speed and a scale no reading room ever could. And here is the detail that ought to stop you, because it is the strangest true thing in this entire story. When a scribe copies a text, he introduces variation, a sign dropped, a word substituted, a line inserted, or lost, or reordered. Copy after copy, century after century, the changes accumulate down the chain of transmission. The team looking at this noticed that those variations behave structurally very much like the variations you find in DNA. Substitution, insertion, deletion. The same shapes of error. So they reached for the tools built to handle exactly that out of bioinformatics. Sequence alignment algorithms, the same class of method used to line one genome up against another and find where they correspond. Sit with what that means. A 4,000-year-old poem is being reassembled with software descended from the mathematics of genetics. The text is treated as a sequence. The scribes are treated as mutation. And the join between two shattered pieces of clay is found the way a shared stretch of ancestry is found between two living things. Now consider what the system brings to that job, and more importantly, what it does not bring. It has no view about what Babylon was. It has no theory of Gilgamesh to defend, no career staked on a reading, no position in a debate that has run since before anyone alive was born. It does not want the text to be profound, and it does not want it to be ordinary. It does not know that one of these fragments is the oldest literature in the world, and the other is a receipt. It looks for overlap. That is all it does. And because it wants nothing, it will hold two pieces against each other that no human would ever have thought to place side by side, purely because a sequence rhymes. In November of 2022, the software recognized something. A fragment belonging to the most recent known tablet of the Gilgamesh epic, copied in 130 BC. Thousands of years after the poem was first composed, someone was still writing it out by hand. And nobody knew until a machine noticed. So what actually came out of the drawers? Take it in order, because each thing makes the one before it worse. Start with volume. The fragmentarium now holds more than 300,000 lines of text, drawn from over 21,000 tablets in a single searchable body. Understand what that sentence replaces. Before it, there was no such thing. There were drawers in London, and drawers in Baghdad, and drawers in Berlin and Philadelphia, and a phrase copied out of one city-state might never once in 150 years be laid beside a phrase from another. The corpus existed. It had simply never been in the same room. Then, Gilgamesh. Since 2018, the platform has matched lines of the epic against roughly 1,500 fragments. In the century and a half before it, working by hand, scholars had managed something on the order of 5,000 pieces in total. Set those two numbers next to each other and let them sit. A few years of software against 150 years of the finest minds the field ever produced, and it is already within touching distance. Then the thing the numbers were hiding. New text, not new joins of material already known. Genuinely new lines in the oldest surviving story on Earth, scenes nobody had read in the modern era. Among them, a passage in which Enkidu argues against killing Humbaba. The wild man, the friend, trying to talk Gilgamesh out of it. That scene was gone. It had been gone for the entire history of the poem's rediscovery, and now it is not. Sit with that for a moment. The oldest story we have was still growing 4,000 years after it was written. And then, in 2025, the Hymn. Anmar Fadl of the University of Baghdad, working with Jimenez, recovered a hymn to the city of Babylon that had been unread for something close to 1,000 years. The platform identified 30 further manuscripts of it, a piece of work that in the old method would have consumed decades of someone's life. With those copies in hand, the text could be almost entirely deciphered. Now, ask yourself what a 1,000-year-old silence broken by a machine ought to contain. A warning. A secret. Something we were not meant to see. Here is what it contained. A city, its river, its buildings, its people, described by someone who lived among them, including passages touching on the roles held by Babylonian women. That is the payload. A man being proud of where he was from, in careful poetry, and taking the trouble to write it down. And the 30 manuscripts tell you something else, something almost tender. A text does not survive in 30 copies because it was hidden. It survives in 30 copies because it was everywhere. The researchers think it was widely known, probably something school children were made to copy out over and over, the way children copy things out now. We did not recover a mystery. We recovered a Tuesday. And this is the point where the word we have been using all along stops working. Lost. We say these texts were lost. Every documentary says it. Every article says it. I have said it twice already in this video. And it is wrong. Lost implies something taken. Lost is the library at Alexandria burning. Lost is a manuscript at the bottom of the sea, a scroll gone to mold, a codex used as kindling by a soldier who could not read it. Lost is destruction, and destruction at least has the dignity of an event. Somebody did something. There is a date. That is not what happened here. What happened here is that men dug these tablets out of the ground, packed them into crates, shipped them across a continent, assigned them numbers, wrote those numbers in a ledger, and put them on a shelf. Every step performed correctly. Nothing burned, nothing sank, nothing was stolen or suppressed or hidden by anyone. They were filed. That is the word. Not lost. Filed. And a thing that has been filed and never read is, functionally, in exactly the same condition as a thing that burned, except that it is still sitting there, intact, in a lit room, in a major capital, behind a door with a handle on it, for 150 years. Sit with what that requires. It requires no villain, no conspiracy, no suppression, no censored find, no scholar burying an inconvenient text. It requires only that the pile be larger than the attention available to it. That is all. The whole thing is an accounting failure, and it swallowed the oldest writing our species produced. And there is one more turn in it, which is the part that genuinely unsettles me. The work compounds. Every join makes the next join easier, because a reconstructed passage becomes a template you can search the pile against, and each new match extends the template further. Overlap begets overlap. That is why the curve since 2018 has bent upward so steeply, why 1,500 fragments in a few years stands against 5,000 in a century and a half. But run that logic backward and it turns cold. If the curve compounds now, then for 150 years it was very nearly flat. We were not slowly recovering Babylon. We were barely moving. Another century of the old method would have produced another slice and the pile would still have been sitting there mostly unread when everyone currently alive was dead. So here is the honest version of the terrifying thing, and it is not what the thumbnail on a video like this usually promises. The loss was not ancient. It was not the flood or the fire or the conquest. The loss was administrative. It was recent. It was ours. It happened in buildings we built, under lights we installed, to objects we had already successfully saved, and it is not finished. Most of those drawers are still shut. Which brings us to what is still out there, and to the reason this has quietly become a race. 2/3 of Gilgamesh is readable. 2/3. That leaves a third, and Jimenez has said plainly that he believes the missing portion is still waiting to be found. Not destroyed, found. Sitting somewhere in a drawer that has not been opened, in a crate that has not been cataloged, or in ground that has not been dug. Somewhere on this planet, probably indoors, there is a piece of clay with the missing third of the oldest story in the world pressed into it, and nobody has looked at it yet. Now weigh that against what has happened to Iraq in living memory. These tablets have come through invasion. They have come through the sacking of the Iraq Museum when objects walked out of the building by the thousand. Fragments still surface on the antiquities market, and this is the part people underestimate, severed from any record of where they were found. A tablet without provenance has lost most of what it could have told us, even when the writing on it is perfect. You can read the words, you no longer know which city wrote them, which archive held them, which tablet sat next to them on the shelf. Half the meaning was in the context. And the context is gone the moment the object leaves the ground unrecorded, which turns digitization into something more urgent than a filing project. Every fragment photographed and transliterated is a fragment that survives the loss of the object itself. If the clay is stolen tomorrow, or shattered, or absorbed into a private collection and never seen again, the text still exists. The race is not against time in the way that phrase is usually meant. It is against the disappearance of physical objects that have already survived 4,000 years and are now, in our century, more fragile than they have ever been. And through all of this, the machine does not care. It should be said plainly. It does not know that Iraq has been at war. It does not know that a museum was looted, that a curator risked something, that these are the first words anyone ever wrote down. It reports overlap between sequences. The urgency is entirely ours, borrowed from us, and projected onto a process that has no capacity to feel it. So let me put the stakes where they actually sit. These were the first people who ever wrote anything down. And what they wrote, overwhelmingly, was not secrets. It was a shipment of barley, a complaint about the quality of copper someone had been sold, a schoolboy's exercise, a hymn about how beautiful your city is, a poem about grief so precise that we still cannot improve on it. The oldest words we have are ordinary words. That is what makes them extraordinary, and we very nearly lost them, not to fire, not to conquest, but by putting them somewhere safe and running out of people to read them. So picture the drawers again, hundreds of thousands of them, still shut, in a building you could walk into on a wet afternoon. No jungle, no sealed chamber, a corridor with a light switch. We tell ourselves the ancient world is silent. It is not silent. It has been talking the entire time, in enormous volume, and there was simply nobody able to listen to all of it at once. What the machine gave back was not a hidden history. It was the ordinary voice of the first people who ever wrote. A city somebody loved. An argument between two friends about whether to kill a monster. So tell me honestly in the comments, because I read every one of them. What else is sitting in a drawer right now, perfectly preserved, perfectly readable, and completely unread? Like this video and subscribe, and tell me which archive we open next.